In 1991, Bill Watts did an interview with PW Torch, and the statements he made were controversial to say the least. Here's an excerpt from that interview. If you want a business and you put money in, why shouldn't you be able to discriminate? It's your business. What is the best thing that has ever happened to the black race? That they were brought to this country? No matter how they got here, you know why? Because they intermarried and they got educated. Lester Maddox was right. If I don't want to sell fried chicken to blacks, I shouldn't have to. It's my restaurant. Hell, at least I respect him for his stand. Lester Maddox was a restaurant owner in 1960s Atlanta at a joint that only served white people. When informed that he was legally obligated to desegregate his restaurant and serve people of all races, Lester Maddox instead chose to close his restaurant in 1965. In 1967, Lester Maddox was elected as the 75th governor of the state of Georgia. This interview by Bill Watts for the most part flew under the radar, and in 1992, Watts was hired to run the WCW. Racism in wrestling is not limited to a few isolated incidents, but it's rather a way of life. Fan favorite and wrestling legend Rowdy Roddy Piper went half blackface at WrestleMania 6 in a very poor and distasteful promo, where he berated his opponent's bugging eyes and wide nose while covered in grease paint. Did I mention that his opponent Bad News Brown was a black man? Former WWF and NJPW wrestler Dick Murdoch was a known racist and a member of the KKK. Over the years, several wrestling insiders, including Tito Santana, Dusty Rhodes, and Rocky Johnson, have confirmed his clan affiliations. Dusty Rhodes recounted a story to former WWE SmackDown head writer Alex Greenfield about the time when Murdoch drove Dusty to a clan party without telling him where they were headed. In 2015, in a highly publicized case, Hulk Hogan, arguably the most famous wrestler of all time, was caught with a xenophobic foot in his mouth when several recordings emerged of him going on a racist rant, dropping the N-word several times and making several other intolerant remarks. In response, Hogan made the typical and predictable media move with a statement to People magazine apologizing for being racist. In a very public move, Hogan was fired from the WWE and their website was cleaned up to remove anything that mentioned the Hulkster. WWE then came out with a statement that read, WWE is committed to embracing and celebrating individuals from all backgrounds, as demonstrated by the diversity of our employees, performers, and fans worldwide. In a not-so-public move, on July 15, 2018, Hogan was reinstated into the Hall of Fame and was invited back the same night at WWE's Extreme Rules pay-per-view. I'm not sure if Vince McMahon and WWE are trying to be funny, but that statement was hilarious, and let me tell you why. In the 1960s and 70s, hardcore wrestling pioneer and one of the greatest heels of all time, the Sheikh was billed as a wealthy and psychotic Syrian. The guy who played the Sheikh, Edward George Farhat, was born in America to parents of Lebanese descent. Edward, a World War II veteran, born and raised in Michigan, was marketed as the all-evil Arab who was out to destroy America. He'd enter arenas to a loud chorus of boos and would kneel on a prayer mat before matches to rile up the crowds. Edward was Catholic. Another similar Middle Eastern gimmick was used by Hussein Ali Waziri, better known as the maniacal Iron Sheikh, in what was then the WWF, to help. Now some of you might be wondering, where's the racism in all of that? At the end of the day, it's all a gimmick, it's all kayfabe, it's all performance arts. And to you, I present our next case, a tragic tale that is rife with racism. Earlier this year, wrestling icon James Arthur Harris passed away at the age of 70. James had tested positive for COVID-19, contracted likely due to his weekly visits to the hospital for dialysis. Complications from his diabetes played a part, and on August 9th, James went into cardiac arrest and passed away that same afternoon. To wrestling fans, James Arthur Harris was better known as the legendary Ugandan monster Kamala, a gimmick that was the epitome of racial profiling and was bestowed upon James Harris by none other than Jerry the King Lawler. Jerry Lawler is one of wrestling's most notorious bigot. He has a long history of making sexist and quasi-rape jokes towards female talent, and recently, referring to an Asian female wrestler Kairi Sane, said that she looked like she ate day-old sushi. You know, because that's all the Asians do, eat sushi. He repeatedly refused to call both Asuka and Kairi by their names, instead referring to them as Kabuki Warrior 1 and 2. He also referred to Mexican wrestler Humberto as the Jumping Bean, and called Japanese wrestler Akira Tozawa's wrestling move the ramen noodle moonsault. Japanese wrestlers have been on the receiving end of such demeaning language for a long while now. Back in the 60s up until the 90s, whenever a Japanese wrestler would hit someone from behind, commentators and especially Jerry Lawler would refer to it as being Pearl Harbored. Enough with that racist jackass, let's get back to James Arthur Harris. Billed as a cannibalistic headhunter from the African jungles, Kamala's appearance would send kids running, and people would boo him across arenas for his wild gimmick. He was portrayed as barely being able to speak English and was accompanied by a manager played by Steve Lombardi, who himself was named Kimchi, after the Korean spicy fermented cabbage dish. Not racist enough yet? James Harris was one of the most intimidating wrestlers of all time, and yet was treated inferior to all of his peers. The night Kamala wrestled Hulk Hogan in the main event at Madison Square Garden, he applied his makeup in a janitor's closet. "It happened all the time," Harris said. "They'd tell me, 'We need this room for Hogan, or Jake the Snake, or Macho Man.' My manager would have to go find curtains and string to tie them up in a corner of the concourse so I could get dressed. That's the way I lived in the World Wrestling Federation. In the ring, I was a superstar. In the locker room, I was nothing." Despite putting asses into seats and filling up arenas, James Harris made 80 to 90% less than other superstars like Hogan, Undertaker, and Andre the Giant. In what is now very public knowledge, despite being a top draw, at SummerSlam 1992, The Undertaker was paid $500,000 for his match against Kamala, while Kamala only made $10,000. He'd eventually retire and struggle with diabetes and borderline poverty until the end of his days. This is a screen grab of Kamala's profile on WWE's website, which clearly hasn't changed with the changing times. He is still referred to as a savage from the wild who spoke no English, conversing only in loud yelps and grunts, and looked like a true jungle beast. WWE and Vince McMahon clearly haven't stepped into the 21st century yet. Now, probably some of you are still thinking, okay, so what? That was the nature of the business back in the day. That was the way wrestling was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and even in the 90s. But since then, wrestling has evolved. WWE has become an inclusive company that respects people of all colors and races. Well, buckle up. In 2003, Booker T was lined up as the biggest contender to Triple H's World Championship run. In the ensuing rivalry, Triple H would go on to deliver racially charged statements, calling Booker's hair nappy and saying people like him didn't win championships. He'd ask Booker to carry his bags into the building and drive his limo for him. Triple H would justify this angle as a play on Booker's own past run-ins with the law, but the racial undertones are undeniable. And that's not even the end of Booker T's misery. At Survivor Series 2005, Vince McMahon was in a backstage segment with John Cena when he casually dropped the N-word before walking past Booker T and his wife Sharmell, who looked on in disbelief.
Just hold it down, trying to take care of business.
Keep it up. I'm a
Who remembers Crime Time? A pair of black wrestlers who stole from their opponents, wore baggy jeans and chains around their necks, and used stereotypical street lingo in their promos. JTG and Shad Gaspard were shown assaulting police officers, robbing people, and participating in other illegal activities. You know, the way all black people from the hood supposedly do. Or Muhammad Hassan, an Arab character played by Italian-American Mark Copani, who was portrayed as a radical and would berate the fans and America. In 2005, a WWE taping featured Hassan bringing in 5 supposed terrorists and choking out The Undertaker. 3 days later, the London bombings occurred, and this footage was aired on national television in America and Canada, unedited. WWE eventually dropped the whole Muhammad Hassan gimmick. Remember when Chavo Guerrero denounced his Mexican heritage, changed his name to Kerwin White, and became the golf-playing, champagne-drinking white guy who employed Hispanic landscapers and golf caddies? Or when known racist and backstage bully John Bradshaw Layfield went hunting for illegal immigrants at the border? Or when known racist and backstage bully John Bradshaw Layfield did the Nazi salute at an event in Germany? In 2019, Jordan Miles, who now goes by his given name Albert Hardy Jr., quit WWE in an expletive-filled video rant posted to Twitter, announcing his departure from the company, amid WWE selling a racially stereotyped t-shirt. WWE claimed that Albert had approved the t-shirt, whereas Albert claimed his objection to it when initial meetings happened. Whether Albert objected to the design or not, it speaks volumes that in 2019, WWE even had the audacity to design such a t-shirt. And this brings us back to the beginning. Cowboy Bill Watts, a veteran wrestler turned promoter, ran Turner Broadcasting's WCW starting in spring of 1992. Hailed as a wrestling genius, his management of WCW was mediocre at best. Wrestlers hated him and his new rules, and the fans and reporters hated the decrease in production value and the boring and overtold storylines. In that infamous 1991 PW Torch interview, Bill Watts not only went on a racist rant, but also on a homophobic one. I can't tell a to get the out. I should have the right to not associate with a if I don't want to. I mean, why should I have to hire a if I don't like? Discriminate against us, don't they? Sure they do. What's even worse is that the interviewer who had to sit through that psychotic tirade, Wade Keller, was gay himself. One of the biggest legends in the wrestling business, Paul Heyman, had a very public feud with Bill Watts and WCW, where Heyman looked back on the brutal anti-Semitism he had faced upon his first encounter with Watts. I'd never met Watts before. The first time I met him was when he became the head of WCW. We weren't 2 minutes into our conversation when he asked me where my beanie was. He then started comparing me to a manager back in the day called Izzy Slapowitz. After a televised wrestling show, the ratings came in, and Watts was livid. This was during the storyline with Medusa. Our segment was the highest rated segment of that program, and Watts says, in front of a room full of people, how pissed off it makes him that a Jew and a drew the highest rating of the show. He felt it was the downfall of the wrestling business. In another backstage incident that was included in litigation against WCW, Watts, in front of witnesses, told Heyman, you why don't you go back to New York to your Jew lawyers because you all belong together. What most non-wrestling fans don't know is that at the time baseball legend Hank Aaron was an executive with TBS, which produced WCW and also the games for the Atlanta Braves. Post the incident with Heyman, Watts was seen socializing with Hank Aaron, who was black, and was unaware of Watts' racism, homophobia, and sexism. PW Torch columnist Mark Madden eventually faxed a copy of Watts' interview to Hank Aaron. That fax was sent out on a Tuesday, and Bill Watts was gone by Wednesday. Bill Watts did find some sympathizers back in the day. Famed commentator Jim Ross was one, who over the years has shown his cognitive dissonance when it comes to racist and homophobic remarks. Watts is often credited as having given JR his big break in the business with his Mid-South wrestling promotion. To put the cherry on the top of this incredibly vile person's career, Bill Watts was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame as a part of the class of 2009. Former wrestlers and insiders like Mick Foley, Raven, Scott Steiner, and Jake the Snake Roberts, amongst others, have also spoken about Bill Watts being the bigot that he was. WWE's Hall of Fame is a collection of the who's who of homophobes, racists, and misogynists, including people like Greg the Hammer Valentine, Tamara Sunny Seich, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, Fabulous Moolah, Billy Gunn, Hulk Hogan, Kid Rock, Donald Trump, The Ultimate Warrior, and Don Morocco, among several others. Next year, in 2021, known racist JBL will be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and Hulk Hogan will get his second induction as part of the infamous NWO. And unfortunately, one of the nicest men to walk in the squared circle, wrestling luminary James Kamala Harris, will continue to be ignored by those in charge of running WWE and the wrestling industry.